Okie dokie, people. So this is kind of just clearing up a few bits very briefly that we haven't quite covered directly when we're looking at History Boys. Then just a couple of suggestions to help get you ready before moving into the Prime Misc and Brodie next week. Okay. So, in terms of what we want to look at, just very briefly, I want to make sure that you're talking about satire in relation to both History Boys and the Prime Misc and Brodie when you get onto it. But satire, we've mentioned this before, just to make sure it's linked in, because we can also link it in with Shakespeare, we can link it in with Gatsby. Various of the texts utilise kind of satire. Then we just have a quick look at Rudge, quick look at scripts. They're characters that we've mentioned briefly alongside some of the other lessons, but just a kind of slightly more direct look at them, just to kind of consider their importance. Rudge as a kind of more an argument figure about the nature of education. Scripts gives us a route into discussing the narrative form that Bennett makes use of, and remember, you've been marked on kind of language structure and form under AO2. And just quickly, we've talked about some of the time shifts in the play. We'll talk about a number of them in relation to scripts, but I just want to have a quick look at that time shift into Irwin in the future as the kind of TV presenter on the history show. We've already looked at the start of the play where we also have a time shift there. We've looked at that shift, but in relation to kind of Posner as part of it. So we're looking at that shift in a slightly different light with this one. And again, it's just about making sure that when you approach this, you're able to talk about kind of language structure and form. So talking about these structural points, these changes in the time setting, why Bennett is doing that, what he achieves through kind of putting them together. And then we'll just very quickly look at kind of how you can kind of consolidate what we've done and how that's going to help you kind of link in and start to see those kind of comparative points as they start to develop as you look at the Prime Misc and Brodie. So the first thing, satire. We want to talk about satire. Just quickly, pause me, find a definition of it. A definition that you can get your head around, maybe some examples of satire at work, and then we're just going to link it very briefly into the History Boys. Okay, so with this, broadly, we kind of define satire in this way: the use of humour, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose, criticise people's stupidity or vices. So this is something that obviously Bennett uses a lot throughout the play. It's something we've touched on. I just want to make sure that when you come to write about this, you're definitely working it in terms of all those different questions. Okay, so he's using this satire to pull out the issues, to point to the problems, and in main this is about the kind of marketization of education, and slightly more broadly than that, the different educational ethoses that you've got running alongside the school. He's satirizing those, he's taking those to kind of the extreme levels to show the problems, to show the stupidity within them. He's also kind of satirizing this whole idea of kind of style over substance, the media, the politics, and in education systems. But satire comes into it right across the play. So it's just a good kind of starting point, and it's something we'll kind of link back in as we go through. And we're talking about in a very broad way, but even within those kind of broader areas, he satirizes more specific kind of views and opinions. Okay, so just bear that in mind. I think pretty much all of you in some way, when you come to writing this essay, will be talking about satire in order to kind of contextualize it. And the Prime Misc and Brodie does the same. It's also got a kind of satirical element to it. So Rudge, we want to talk about him to start with. We want to look at him kind of specifically. So to start with, Just spend a couple of minutes just jotting down in kind of brief note form what can we say about Rudge's kind of role in the narrative in relation to the dangers of education, the kind of more subtle abuses within the education system. Rudge, I'm trying to think around it. Rudge could come into the gender and sexuality question. We could look at him in relation to maybe a more conventionalized depiction of kind of masculinity potentially. But really, he's going to fit more within the dangers of education and the kind of abuse angle. So just spend a couple of minutes, think over your overview of Rudge. What would you say about him? How would you characterize him in an overall sense? Okay, so we've kind of briefly touched on Rudge before when we've been talking about those kind of different educational ethoses, the kind of idea of the foil character and things. We haven't talked about him directly. Now, Rudge's role in the narrative, in a sense, he's an outsider in many ways. The expectations around him are lower. He's been kind of labeled as the thick one, essentially. So, in relation to kind of the dangers of education and that kind of abuse, that kind of idea of labeling comes into it. He's important in terms of demonstrating that, in terms of kind of satirizing, as we're kind of linking back, that process of labeling. It kind of mocks the way in which this happens, and Bennett kind of undermines this. So Rudge is part of this kind of History Boys clique, but in many ways he doesn't fit into it. He doesn't necessarily react in the same way as some of the other boys, and outwardly potentially he shows maybe less interest than some of them. But Bennett kind of suggests that underneath this, there's maybe a greater insight coming through within Rudge than with some of the other ones. So he's an interesting character to use, especially with those dangers of education questions and the kind of abuse question. Now, what I want you to do, there's kind of three strands to this, okay? And you should be able to kind of range right the way across the play by this stage. It's not a terribly long play. Start off by finding examples that show us where Rudge is marginalised or where the expectations around him are set low. So think in terms of teachers, but also think where he's kind of presented as an outsider within the group of boys as well, where he's not necessarily presented in the same way as them. He doesn't necessarily fit in exactly the same way. When you've done that, find examples of where Bennett kind of suggests Rudge himself or characterizes Rudge as fulfilling that role, where Rudge's characterization seems to fit that kind of less intellectual, less intelligent role within the narrative. But then the last kind of strand of this, you need to find where Bennett undermines this expectation and demonstrates that Rudge is actually kind of insightful, that this can then lead you into this argument that Bennett is showing us the dangers of this kind of labeling process, that he's showing us that, where it's done, it can form a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, or it doesn't really account for a student's kind of genuine potential, because Rudge kind of manages to kind of escape this labeling, at least to a point. Okay, so I would say with this, you're kind of ranging across the play. You should know the play fairly well by this point, though, and it's easy to look out for kind of where Rudge is in the narrative or reference within the narrative. I would say aim with each of these 3-4 bits of evidence that kind of go with each one, and then I'll kind of go through some of the kind of bits that I would pick out that would allow you to kind of discuss around Rudge and kind of link him into a discussion in this way. Okay, so if we look at kind of right when the boys are introduced at the very start, and Hector's kind of opening bit, well done scripts, bravo Dakin, Crowther, congratulations, and Rudge too, remarkable. Now, what you get within this, and something that you can kind of talk about in terms of setting up those expectations, is the kind of the ordering within the utterance, the fact that Rudge becomes kind of an afterthought within this. You can talk about the fact that where you get kind of Crowther, congratulations, bravo Dakin, and Rudge too, and then you get the pause, and remarkable kind of comes afterwards. Now, as you kind of talk about this, there's an ambiguity here. Is Hector kind of presented as saying that Rudge himself is remarkable, or is there a kind of sense of almost shock that Rudge has got the grades requisite to potentially apply to the university? So it kind of undermines this expectation, and Rudge's utterance that kind of follows this arguably kind of reinforces this. What were A levels then? And it maybe suggests, an insecurity, a lack of understanding. It's an interrogative. Rudge often asks more questions than the rest of the students rather than actually kind of posing answers himself. So Bennett suggests maybe that he's sort of less articulate, less kind of willing to offer a response. He suggests maybe a kind of weaker element there. As we kind of go through, yeah, I think the next bit I would kind of pick out in relation to Rudge kind of fits with this kind of outsider status. If you skipped kind of page 12, you might pick out things like the fact that in the kind of brothel scene, Hector kind of, I know it's all in kind of French, but he kind of poses the question, where shall we set the scene? And Rudge is the first one to answer at this stage, but he's shut down by the other boys. So Danza Garage, I'm very bad at French, so that probably sounds completely off, but there we go. And the other boys altogether, none. So where Rudge does make a suggestion, where Rudge does come forward, he's kind of denied. Rudge's suggestion is something more kind of, lower class in the garage. He's not kind of setting it in an interesting location the same way as the boys are kind of trying to draw it out. And he's then kind of it's all of them set against him as well within this narrative. So Bennett it's not just one of the boys saying no, it's all of the boys no, no, no. His idea is kind of cast down, and he's then kind of again marginalised within it. It's then worth kind of noting that really through the rest of the scene, the brothel scene as a whole, he doesn't really engage with it. And if you look at different performance versions, in some of them he'll simply be kind of sitting at the back taking notes from a book or something like this. And he doesn't come back into this until right at the end, after the headmaster's been and gone. It's true though, sir, we don't have much time. Where there's this kind of worrying concern. He doesn't see the kind of relevance of what Hector's doing. So it's that kind of, again, it's another way in which he's marginalised within this. The fact that visually on stage he's depicted not taking part as directly as the other boys once he's been pushed to the margins, essentially. Okay, and then I would kind of say skip ahead again. If you look on page 22, you get a sense here, and Rudge is kind of, it's almost kind of an aside to the audience. It's not a comment to the rest of the boys that are there. And nobody thinks I have hope in this exam. Fuck them. Okay, so there is this awareness within him that he's being marginalized. Bennett suggests that he knows he's being labeled, but there's a kind of rejection of this labeling. But it does come at the price of him, or not the price of it, but also in terms of him seemingly kind of reinforcing this. Rudge is one of those characters that uses more kind of the taboo language than a lot of the other ones. So the kind of the F word within that. We also have the elision, the kind of the contraction of them. So his language is often made more kind of brief, more kind of it lacks the elevation of a number of the other characters, but it does show him rejecting this labeling. It shows him kind of aware of it, and challenging it at the same time. Okay, I think the next bit that's worth pointing out around Rudge is that exchange with Mrs. Lintott on page 33 and then on to page 34. Now, I'm going to look at the end of it actually before looking slightly earlier in it even. Rudge later on he's given some quite kind of articulate language. While they have no intrinsic artistic merit, they achieve some of the permanence of art simply by persisting and acquiring incremental significance, if only as a social history. But what Bennett does within this, and he has it within the stage directions, and he has it with that initial kind of introductory point to it. Mr. Irwin says that he's reading from his notes, and Rudge is a note taker. He's depicted as this throughout the play. You will often see him on stage kind of desperately kind of scribbling down exactly what the teachers are saying on stage. And at one point, Irwin turns around to him and says, I must not make a note of every single word that the teacher says. So whilst there's a kind of articulateness to Rudge there, it's also not necessarily his own words, and it's made clear by Bennett that, you know, Rudge is reciting rather than necessarily coming up with an originality of thought. Having said that, you can debate around this, you can look at the way that this is kind of undermined, because if we look at the opening to that exchange, and it's not necessarily the most poetic of metaphors, but you've got Rudge using a more kind of creative metaphor around the opening of the exchange. You force fed us the facts. Now we're in the process of running around acquiring flavour. Is that what Mr. Irwin says? Oh no, miss, the metaphor's mine. So there is this kind of creative element to Rudge. There's this kind of undermining going on of this labeling, even within this kind of reinforcing image of him. Okay, so it's a kind of an important moment around that. Then we want, hang on. Okay, so the next bit I would kind of pick out is it comes from the kind of the practice interviews, that kind of exchange that goes on there. And there's a couple of bits that you can kind of pick out to talk around Rudge here. Now, Mrs. Lintott kind of poses the question to him, how would you define history, Mr. Rudge? And again, he's depicted using the kind of the profanity, the taboo language. In a sense, this kind of undermines his intellect. It's just one fucking thing after another. Now, on one level, this appears very straightforward, but there is a truth to it. There's a simplicity that kind of captures essentially the whole of the topic. So Rudge's language, whilst it's presented as crude, you know, there is sort of almost an originality in just how simplistically he's placing it across. As it comes towards the end of this kind of scene, this exchange, again, it comes back to that self-awareness that goes with Rudge, that Bennett has kind of created around him. It's also important that Bennett kind of he draws attention through Rudge to the fact that people's intelligence is not always a straightforward kind of academic intelligence. Just because Rudge doesn't have what we would define as kind of, going back to academic intelligence, doesn't mean that he's not got a different type of intelligence. So if you look at the bit on page 86, if they like me, they'll take me, they want to take me, they'll take me because I'm dull and ordinary. I'm no good in interviews, but I've got enough chat to take me around the golf course. And maybe there'll be somebody on the board who wants to go around the golf course. you think that's a joke, but golf makes the same sense to me as architectural films do to you. You may not rate it, but it's an accomplishment. I may not know much about John Paul Sartre, but I've got a handicap of 4. So Rudge here kind of directly challenges the expectations. He says, I know as much as you know in these kind of typical academic areas. Just because society values one area more than another doesn't mean that that's right necessarily. And Bennett is using Rudge to kind of challenge that. He also kind of highlighting the fact that there's a kind of positive discrimination element that's potentially going to lead into Rudge getting a place at one of these universities. Okay, then we get last couple of bits around Rudge. So if you skip to kind of page 97, you might well have kind of pointed out the headmaster's kind of expectations around him. Rudge's place at the university is not revealed until later on. So initially, Bennett creates this assumption that he's not got in. And then he has kind of the headmaster. It was always an outside chance. I felt we were indulging him by allowing him to enter at all. That college must think we're fools. A pity. It would have been good to have a clean sweep, not sheep. Rudge, you haven't heard from Oxford. So there's an irony that Bennett kind of creates around this. The headmaster himself didn't go there. The headmaster himself is not articulate. Remember, we looked at him in kind of one of the earlier lessons. And that idea, those kind of the language choices around it, the verb choices, we were indulging him. That, again, it suggests a lowered expectation of Rudge and a kind of the labelling process that goes with it. But then Bennett undermines this. Bennett has him get his place. And it kind of links into those family connections and the fact that positive reinforcement. I think we've talked about that before, so I'm not going to go about it in massive detail. The other thing with Rudge, the other couple of things we'll point out very quickly. If you go to page 104, now across the whole of the play, with Hector, they've been kind of playing this game with Hector where if Hector can't guess the kind of the film or the kind of the song that they're doing for him, then they have to put money into the jar, and then when he can't guess it, then it's given out essentially to the person who's given him something that he can't get. Now, Rudge is the one that Bennett has win this. Okay, and it comes with a kind of an insightful element. So again, one of those closing images with Rudge is of him again winning, being successful. So rather than playing the game in a conventional way, he has Rudge singing the Pet Shop Boys. Again, it's sort of archaic to you lot now. It's even archaic to me. But the Pet Shop Boys would have been kind of pop music at the point that this is set at. So Hector doesn't have this kind of same awareness of it as now, just in the same way as, I'm not up to date with kind of contemporary pop music. You kind of get left behind as you grow older, essentially. And yeah, Rudge's kind of utterance about halfway down the page. So is Gracie Fields, only that's his crap. This is our crap. So again, it's undermined arguably to a sense through the taboo language that again we've got used alongside Rudge, but there's an insight here that Bennett is giving to Rudge as well. What Rudge is kind of showing an awareness of is that a lot of the time you're simply kind of suffering that the teacher's got control, the teacher is kind of pushing forward their agenda, whereas Rudge is kind of taking control. This is his agenda instead. Only that's his crap, Hector's crap. This is our crap. So he's gamed the system and he's won. Hector says, in which case I'm now illiterate, but Rudge is right. His crap or my crap, it makes no difference. So in another reference to our popular culture, I say, give him the money, Barney. So Rudge wins. Rudge is presented as one of the students who comes to a kind of genuine insight through the course of the play. He has a character development, um, and kind of progresses, though it's come a kind of harder work. It's more kind of workmanship like for him. So to summarise with Rudge, he's used to kind of explore labelling within education. The way that teachers do this can be viewed as a kind of abuse, essentially, not in a kind of direct way, but in a more subtle way. If you're labelling students, you're kind of abusing them and their potential, potentially. And Bennett shows him as an outsider at various points in the play. He uses various techniques in order to seemingly reinforce that expectation of Rudge, but he also uses a number of more subtle elements to undermine this labelling and to show that Rudge's intelligence, whilst it falls outside maybe our conventional ideas of it, is still legitimate. And he has Rudge come to a number of realizations that show an insight within him that is potentially lacking in some of the other characters. Right, so we move on. We talk about Scripps, okay? Now, Scripps is an interesting character, and what I kind of pose to you to start with is what can we actually say about Bennett's depiction of him as a character? Do you think, as you kind of think back over Scripps, that he has the same psychological depth as somebody like Posner or Dakin or even Rudge? Okay, so just spend a minute, think back over, just have a think about Scripps overall. What could you actually say about him? Okay, so with Scripps, the main thing that we can kind of talk about with him is he's the character that's used to explore kind of Christianity in the kind of education system in the contemporary world of the play. But beyond this, he's more of a functional character than a lot of the other ones. He's present, he's there, and this allows him to kind of be used as a tool within the narrative. But really, he's more of a plot device in many ways. So before we get to him as a plot device, we just want to quickly interrogate the kind of the aspects of his Christianity to start with. So he, in a different way to Rudge, is kind of an outsider within this, in that he is a person of faith, or at least seemingly so. And what I want you to do quickly, again, skipping back through, just look for bits of dialogue by Scripps. You don't need to pick out from other characters here really around him. I just want you to interrogate to start with. Is his Christian faith depicted as real by Bennett, or is it depicted as something kind of false within it? Is it simply being used to game the system, or is it something genuine? As you're thinking about that, and the way his kind of Christian faith is depicted, just again, try and link back into those questions. Really, I suppose it's going to be more a dangers of education question link. How is his view of religion linked back into those kind of dangers of education? Okay, so with Scripps, we get a number of kind of references to his faith. And I'm just going to pick up on kind of 3 or 4 of these just to allow you a kind of quick discussion. Now, in terms of that kind of dangers of education question, you might talk about the way in which religion is depicted as something that in its absence is actually potentially we're losing a cultural aspect within education. So its importance is disappearing, and therefore we're creating a kind of a void in certain ways. Whilst I got it paused, I did also kind of suddenly think something I should have said before. You could also link this into the kind of gender and sexual dynamics question, because his religion does kind of link into him repressing his sexual impulses. You have a number of kind of crude points around that, like Dakin sort of saying, well, when you finally get past it, I'll stand far away, and the kind of sexual implications of that. So the first bit I want you to look at, page 7, it's true what he said, I did believe in God. Now, this is an interesting way to introduce it. I'll come on to it in a second with scripts in terms of as a device, but to introduce it very briefly now, he's kind of a narrative voice within this, and he's looking back retrospectively, and I did believe in God. So the tense is important here. It suggests that the adult script, the more mature scripts looking back on it, no longer has this faith, but he did have a genuine faith at the point in which the play is set. And he marks himself out as different. This kind of whole belief system becomes archaic. Nobody else does. So he's the outsider, he's depicted as such. And he uses the simile. So, like stamp collecting, it seems to have gone out. And I suspect even the vicar thinks I'm a freak. Then there's a kind of ambiguity in the bit that follows. But the big man is glad. The prayer book, hymns ancient and modern, lucky boy. Now, the big man can have two potential meanings. They refer to Hector as the big man. Obviously, it can also mean the big man in the sky, as in God. Now, what's kind of pointed out here, if we take this as the interpretation that the big man is Hector, then the bit that follows, the prayer book, ancient hymns ancient and modern, is kind of part of our collective literary heritage. It's, yes, they are religious texts, but they also have a kind of literary merit. They, some of it is very poetic as part of it. So there's a kind of an extra angle to scripts that he's given through this, but also he's the outsider. So a lot of people are missing out on this aspect of education, this, an area of education that's been discarded, essentially. Okay, I think there are other bits you could pick out around scripts and this kind of religious aspect, but I think we'll stick to just 2 bits just for the sake of time here. If you skip then to kind of later on in the play on page 96, I think the other bit is important here in that, yes, he's depicted a kind of genuine faith and it sets him out, but there's an awareness of the competitive advantage this gives him as well. I attended the Eucharist in the college chapel where, apart from a girl from a school in West Bromwich, I was the only communicant. So again, it sets him as an outsider. It was a genuine act of worship. So it was a genuine act of worship. Again, he's placing it in the past tense, but he does suggest that this is a genuine faith. But then you get a kind of discourse marker, though, and it does suggest an awareness of this as a kind of potential competitive advantage. Though I knew it would do me no harm with the college, the self-servingness of my devotions in this instance leaving me untroubled. So he's aware that this public show of devotion, this Christianity, is also going to give him a competitive advantage in this field of education. So again, it can link in with this kind of idea of dangers, this positive reinforcement that can be kind of gamed. It's part of a system and people are aware of the ways in which they can manipulate the system to their advantage. That's a danger because, it means that not necessarily the right people are getting to the right positions. It's also, simply about the kind of the religious aspect in and of itself. As I say, it's an aspect you could explore in more detail, especially around the kind of the sex aspect that goes with it if you were doing the gender and sexuality question. But the other bit I want to talk about around scripts is the fact that essentially he's an example of the use of metafiction. You could talk about this in your your responses. And our kind of definition to this is where an author self-consciously alludes to the artificiality or the literariness of a work by parodying or departing from novelistic conventions and traditional narrative techniques. So generally, in a dramatic text, it will simply follow through chronologically. It's quite difficult in a dramatic text to kind of actually have time skips, especially out of order. But scripts is what is used to kind of facilitate that to us. And he is, at certain points within the play, he stops and he talks to the audience as the more adult scripts, and he introduces kind of details of later lives and things like this. He's not the only character to do this, but Bennett does use this for kind of specific purposes. Okay, and Scripps is then able to become this kind of retrospective voice in the narrative, and he's able to then kind of reveal truths within the narrative that others are unable to do. So because of that kind of more adult voice looking back, that retrospective element, he's able to kind of point things out. And he's also kind of omniscient at various points. He's able to kind of see into people's minds, their motivations to reveal things to us. So again, what we need to do, scanning through for Scripps again. This time, rather than focusing on the bits where he's talking about religion, just look through, see where Bennett is using him to reveal kind of truths where he steps outside of the narrative. And you can kind of talk about how he's used as a narrative voice, essentially, but within the context of a play where we don't really normally have a narrative voice. So just again, spend 10 minutes looking through it, scanning for scripts, find the bits, and then I'll just point out a couple of bits that we can potentially use. Okay, so I'll just point out kind of a couple of bits here. If you look on page 35, then what we've got is Scripps revealing kind of Irwin's future to us. This is something we'll kind of build on in a minute, but Irwin became well known as a historian, or when Irwin even, sorry, it was for finding his way to the wrong end of seesaws, settling on some hitherto unquestioned historical assumption, then proving the opposite. Now, the metaphor is interesting here, the idea of the wrong end of the seesaw. So there's this kind of awareness of Irwin he always has done and he always will work around kind of gaming the system of using the shocking line of argument rather than necessarily the most logical line of argument, simply for its showy nature, for the impact that has. So Scripps is able to kind of draw out the truth of Irwin's kind of style of teaching. It's also an important technique in that it means that when we get that skip to Irwin doing the TV show, it's been foreshadowed for us. We understand that kind of transition into it, which is something we'll build on in a minute. So we'll come back to that in a moment. In fact, I don't want to take that out. It's also, so if you skip to page 44, you get the kind of omniscience of Scripps. And if you look, Posner did not say it, but since he seldom took his eyes off Dakin, he knew that Irwin looked at him occasionally too, and he wanted him to say so. Basically, he just wanted company. Now, Scripps comes in here as our kind of narrative voice, and he's the one to kind of more directly reveal to us Irwin's kind of more closeted homosexuality. He's also kind of, he's inside Posner's mind and kind of revealing the more subtle aspects that you can't necessarily depict on stage because it's too subtle for an audience to kind of take in as part of it when you're looking around the whole of a stage. So Scripps is important here. in kind of exploring the sexuality, the repressed sexuality of both Posner and Irwin. And if you were doing the sexuality and gender and sexuality question, you potentially talk about the use of scripts as a narrative voice within it, his positioning within it in order to kind of reveal this to us. That's going to help you towards those kind of narrative techniques. We also get scripts used later on. This is the other bit I'll point out. It's scripts who talks about the motorcycle accident towards the end. So if you look at page 105, there are various theories about what happened when he came off. It's inconceivable he ever touched Irwin, who would in any case have been clutching his briefcase. Or it may have been that Hector was so used to driving with one hand, and that bit's not the important bit, the bit that I want. Slightly further down, where he kind of theorizes around this. So I think that since Irwin had never been on the back of a bike before, going round the corner, he leaned out instead of in, and so unbalanced Hector. That would be appropriate to trust Irwin to lean the opposite way to everyone else. So again, it's him being used this time more around the kind of dangers of education and that kind of conflict aspect, him looking back retrospectively to kind of dwell on it. And it's both a literal description of the motorcycle crash, but it's also something metaphorical. It looks at the conflict between Hector and Irwin and the way that they kind of unbalance each other and are damaged by it. And you could kind of talk around that. Okay, so Scripps, an interesting character. You can use him to talk around the kind of Christian aspect, the way that Christianity leads to kind of repression, but also how Christianity is something that's been lost, fading away within the educational sphere, but it's also something that links into that kind of gaming of the system. Within the other questions, you can also talk about him being used by Bennett in a kind of metafictional way as a kind of narrative voice in order to reveal certain truths and aspects within the play, to apply a kind of retrospective view on certain events that allows Bennett to kind of push his point of view through the play. Right, last couple of bits to look at. Dead quickly, we just kind of consider the time shift. They like you to talk about structure when you're talking about this, so let's just make sure we're hammering this home. Think about the time shifts. Obviously, we've got some with scripts, talking through that. Just quickly, though, we'll focus on the kind of flash forward to Irwin as a TV historian. So for that bit, we're looking at kind of the Act 2 bit. And on page 58 to 63. And I just want you to think, how does this flash forward to Irwin as a TV historian? What does it show us? How does it link into his past? And how does it link into his future? This is kind of Irwin in the middle of his life. He's teacher, TV historian, politician. So we've seen him as a politician, we've seen him as a teacher. How does this link and bridge between the two? And how does it become a kind of comment on wider society? Okay, spend a few minutes, think about it, then I'll just go through a couple of points in relation to it. Okay, so the important thing to kind of pull out here is that what we see within Irwin at these various stages is him, again, and we mentioned this right back at the start when we looked at the opening scene, him using the same techniques despite the kind of different roles he's taking on. Yeah, so sorry. At each stage, he's using the same techniques. And what Bennett is kind of showing us through this is that we as a society value show and kind of shock value and the interest that comes with that over a genuine kind of truthfulness, academic kind of interest to it, essentially. So in all these different fields as well. So Irwin used the same technique in education, in TV, in politics, and in each case it's successful. So it's style over substance, and Bennett is showing us the kind of danger of that, the kind of corruptive nature of that. So while he's teaching, if you look on page 35, at the top of it, if you want to learn about Stalin, study Henry VIII. If you want to learn about Mrs. Thatcher, study Henry VIII. If you want to know about Hollywood, study Henry VIII. And when he's there doing his TV program, you get that exact parallelism, that link back to exactly the same things he's saying when he's in this teaching situation. One of the more memorable bits of the play is when he's first talking to the class as well. And again, he's going for the kind of shock value, and he's talking about the kind of foreskins of Christ. And he's doing the same thing here within this kind of history program. He's focusing on the toilets. You get this kind of deliberately provocative statement, God is dead, shit lives. And as you go kind of towards the end of this, so you could say that in the moment, this is on page 63, sorry, in the moment of the dissolution, the monasteries came closest to the ideals of their foundation, and that it was thanks to the villain Henry VIII that the monasteries achieved their purpose and their apotheosis. Where in all these situations, he's taking the controversial viewpoint, he's using that in order to create an interest and argument, but at the end of the day, it's style over substance. It's lying for the sake of effect. It's there's an immorality to this, essentially, that Bennett is depicting to us, and he's showing us, he's satirizing this through the figure of Irwin. And it, again, as you look on page 63, it links back into this kind of schoolroom again. And his use of apotheosis links into kind of Posner studying it within his kind of school classroom setting, and looking at the term and the definition. So Bennett wants us to see the connections between these different walks of life and how there's this kind of shared immorality that goes with it. Okay, couple of quick things to kind of just finish us off and get you thinking of the things that you kind of could be doing here. These are our 3 questions again. Now, one of the things that will be very helpful to you as you start to think about putting together your second coursework later in the year is holding those questions in mind, either in brief note form, or you can do it slightly more extensive if you want, starting to think about lines of argument just in relation to the history boys at the moment that could go with either all 3 questions or your chosen question. Because if you think about those now, you will have something where you're then starting to think, as you look at the primary student Brody, how am I seeing a similarity here? How am I seeing a difference here? How can I create comparison to this point that I know I want to talk about, rather than trying to come to it at the very end? So if I just take kind of an example of this, I've identified within the history boys that there's the kind of danger of labelling students. I might note down that Rudge is important in this. Rudge is labelled and he's self-aware of this labelling. His position is seemingly reinforced by Bennett. He's shown kind of rising above this. There's the links into positive discrimination, and essentially Rudge is a kind of comedic figure. There's a comedy that goes with him. And then I know that I potentially want to make this point. Okay, I can talk about it as abuse, or I can talk about it as danger of education. I know this is a point that I might want to make. Then as I'm reading through the primary student Brody, and this kind of already gives away some aspects of it, I go, oh, well, Mary, she's kind of labelled as well. I'm not looking for direct similarities all the way through, whereas Rudge is a comedic figure. Mary isn't very funny. Mary is a figure more of a kind of a pathetic figure. We kind of pity her, essentially. she's labelled, but she's not aware of it. Just like Rudge, she's in a sense isolated from the rest. But where Rudge becomes a success and rises up through this labelling, in many ways, Mary's kind of destroyed through it. But I will find it easier to look at the Prime Miss Jean Brodie and start thinking about my comparison points if I've already just kind of started to jot down my lines of argument that go with the different questions in a slightly more specific sense from the history boys. The other way to kind of approach this and to start thinking about comparisons already at this stage is to draw kind of comparisons around features of technique that may well work into points as well. So it can come through you comparing argument, but you can also kind of compare or talk about differences in terms of how they're using different techniques or the similar techniques in each. So I know that in the History Boys they use foreshadowing, they're using kind of retrospective comment, and I can talk about this being done through scripts as a narrative voice. I can talk about the flash forwards to Irwin. I can talk about Lintart's discussion of the students' futures, which we talked about before. Now, making a note of this, seeing those kind of general structural points now, again, it's making me start to think, as I look at the Prime Miss Jean Brodie, okay, how am I either finding similarity in there or am I finding difference? And as I talk about the Prime Miss Jean Brodie, well, rather than scripts as a kind of limited narrative voice, it's got this consistent, omniscient third-person narrative. It's got time shifts, so we see Brodie in the future. It's got the foreshadowing of her betrayal, and that's cut off slightly, but never mind. There's the focus on kind of Sandy's future, and there are limited references to the futures of other characters as well, but Sandy's future is focused on. So again, I'm starting to think about kind of comparisons that I'll make. I don't need to worry about the essay itself at this stage, but just more general comparative points that I'm going to know I'm going to need to kind of bring in order to kind of hit that comparative element when I do come to answer it. So if you start thinking about that now, start getting that into mind, you'll find it much easier when in several weeks from now you start drafting this, you come to put it together, okay? But that'll do for today, people. Toodaloo.